Here we are. All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started here in just a few moments. We've had well over 100 schools register for today, so we got quite a crowd. I want to make sure everybody hops in here. My pleasure certainly to have with us today Tim Selden and our guest today, Lindsay Pollock. Thanks for taking the time, Lindsay. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, before we dive in again, as a reminder for everybody, one, this will be recorded. You should get the email within 24 hours following today's session. Um, when you're done the session, we have a quick 15-30 second post-webinar survey. Always appreciate you taking the time to let us know how you like today, what you want to learn more about, and certainly if you need any additional support, whether it's with the Tim and the Montessori Foundation, with your professional development consulting work, connect with Tim if you need any software support, for marketing and admissions and classroom management. We have options there as well, so let us know. But with that being said, and please use, for today, especially because, we'll have a good amount of folks on today's session. If you have a question, we're certainly going to have time for Q&A today, and it's going to be a discussion today. So as we're going through different topics, please try to use the Q&A feature inside of Zoom. That's a good way for us to keep all the questions organized and make sure we don't miss anything. So with that being said, I'm going to hop behind the scenes here, going to manage the Q&A. Tim, let me turn it over to you to officially get us kicked off.
Glad to. Well, welcome everyone. Again, I want to do a quick promo for my friend Clint Lausch. Clint is the owner of a company called Ames, or he has a partnership with Montessori Compass called Montessori Growth Suite. But basically, Clint is running my favorite Montessori marketing agency, and he's got software and solutions that I think very highly of. My friend Lindsay Pollock is among other things, the provost of Sarasota University. She's a longtime Montessori educator, Montessori school leader, public, private, and generally just good human being. And we were talking a couple of weeks ago about how to retain teachers and how to improve morale. And Lindsay popped in and I invited her to start getting involved with this webinar. So whenever you're available, Lindsay, I want you to feel free that this is your webinar too, and we'll plan them together and do them together. So thanks
Well,
for
it's an
being
honor
here.
to be here. Honor to be here with you, Tim, and thank you for the kind words. Um, it's exciting just to have this space together where Montessorians can gather and share best practices and what's happening in our contemporary landscape. So thank you for facilitating this, Tim, and for making this possible.
We should also mention that Sarasota University, which is the first Montessori accredited university for bachelor completion, master's degrees in Montessori, a doctoral program that just launched, is offering continuing education units at a small additional fee for those of you who need it. And each hour of webinar is one unit of continuing education. If you're interested, write to me, Tim Selden at Montessori.org, or Clint or whoever. Let us know you're interested. We will start sending out reminders of how you approach the university to arrange for your continuing education units, but they are available thanks to Dr. Pollock and others at Sarasota University. And I must say, I'm proud to be a member of the Board of Trustees of Sarasota University. So what we're going to do today, instead of doing a slideshow, we're going to do what I like to do, which is just have a conversation. And while this is a webinar, and we can't see those of you who are in the audience, you can unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand and ask to be unmuted. I think you can do it for yourself. And our intention is to have a conversation to the degree that you're willing to have a conversation. In the meantime, Lindsay and I will get it started because we know how hard it is to recruit teachers, and we know how easy it is for them to not feel loved and appreciated and burned out and all that bad stuff that can happen. And let's face it, it is hard to keep a happy, healthy, productive faculty today, right?
Absolutely. It's tough. It's tough. And we want to be sure that we're recruiting and retaining folks who are passionate about this work because it's hard work. And if you're not in it because you love it, you will easily burn out and potentially burn out the people around you. So when I think about recruiting, Tim, I just think about how important it is to hire people who are the right fit for your school, for the culture that you have, and people who will bring the positive energy to your campus. I've often heard it said that you can hire a person with all the right credentials, but if they don't have the right attitude and the right perspective, that their credentials aren't worth a hill of beans.
That's absolutely true. Emotional intelligence is everything. We all know people with multiple graduate degrees and years of experience who just aren't the right fit for you. It doesn't mean they wouldn't do well elsewhere, but they may not be the right fit for your school. So when you think about it, marry in haste, repent at leisure. Taking the time to really ask, is this person the right fit, instead of just grabbing the first warm body who's willing to work at your school for the money you can afford, and realizing that you can't afford to make a mistake. That doesn't mean you won't make them. We all make them,
It
but
happens.
we need to do the best we can to get the right people. And I would suggest that, you need to think about what do you need to look at when you're first hiring. And I know our topic is what do we do after we've hired, but may as well take a moment and ask, how do we know that someone's a right fit?
Right. And I think, that marry in don't marry in haste. So marry at leisure. That courtship, if you will. It's most of the success that I had as a school leader was to look at the pool of known individuals first. Are there folks who who might be interested in developing into a guide, and folks who are interested in um, in the professional development, in earning a Montessori credential. And for me, that meant, really encouraging some of my teaching assistants to provide professional development for the assistants in the classrooms, and to really observe the interactions in the classrooms to see where were potential guides in my interactions, and that would include volunteers who I might have. One of my most successful hires was a gentleman who was a volunteer reader from our Chamber of Commerce, and he had such a way of interacting with our secondary students that after a year of volunteering, I approached him about thinking about being a Montessori guide, and he said, "Well, before I went into business, my degree was actually in secondary education." And he said, "I've been so impressed by what's happening here at your school." And we then launched into a conversation about what it would mean to become a Montessori guide. He then took the training and spent many years at my school in our secondary program. And so looking at the talent around you, they may not be fully developed at the moment, but perhaps this is a person who would be interested in even a career change. I consulted with a school. I won't. I consulted with the public school, and as we walked through the building, it really took me by surprise when the principal started explaining to me all of the different places that she'd recruited her new Montessori guides. There'd been a teller at the bank that she'd spoken with, who was finishing her degree in elementary ed. And she had such a pleasant, warm, helpful demeanor that this principal thought, I wonder if she'd be interested in Montessori education. She identified those traits and as you say, the emotional intelligence that were important to her values as a Montessori leader. and then recruited from all over her community to bring the talent to her building. And I thought it was such genius to be, a way of thinking outside the box. Where might you find people whose passion is working with young people and being that guide in your Montessori classroom?
Absolutely. A way of thinking of it is a school, as I often say, is really nothing but people. You have all the buildings, all the labs, the libraries you want, but it's really about people. And a great school, whether it's a military academy or a monastery or a Montessori school, is a school where the people are there for the right reasons. They really want to be there. They like each other. There is shared values and there's a shared understanding of who we are and how we treat people. So the idea of creating commonality, of vision, of agreements, of how we treat each other, what we do in the course of the day is really important. I also would suggest to us that people like you and I, Lindsay, and probably everyone else that's online, I see a lot of friends that are in the name, Timothy Beach and Terry Kraft and Sanj Sarai and so forth. Lots of good people are here. And again, we encourage you, raise your hand, unmute, put things in the question and answer, the chat, whatever. We'd love to hear who are you, where are you from, what's your own experience, what are your questions, what do you most want to know? But I would suggest to you that as a head of school or as a part of an admin team, your three great tasks are first to be the minister, the pastor, the candidate, the articulator of the vision, the philosophy, the dream. What are we all about? The cheerleader. That's one thing. But the second is the building blocks are finding the right people. I mean, you can pay the bills, you can do all the compliance work, all that's great. But the real big tasks are recruiting the right people to work for each position, because you have a really bad day if you hire a janitor who abuses a child. Your
Yeah.
school is going to have the next 5 years are going to be miserable. So hiring the right bus driver, hiring the right assistant, hiring the right middle school teacher, the right curriculum coach or coordinator. These are really important things that we do in the course of our day and our year. The other is recruiting the right families, because again, there are a lot of great parents in the world who just don't love you for who you are. And finding the people who will appreciate you and want to work with you and your staff, that's really important. And the last thing is there are no second-class citizens in a Montessori school. The assistant or the person that took Montessori training from a brand X, third tier Montessori training program that you normally wouldn't hire from, needs to be treated with the same love and respect that someone from the most prestigious Montessori program. And an assistant needs to be treated with the same respect as the most senior Montessori teacher, because once we get into one-upsmanship, whether it's my Montessori credentials better than yours, or you, Dr. Pollack, as far as I recall, had a strong background in educational leadership. I don't think you were ever a Montessori teacher, right?
I was not ever a Montessori teacher. I did earn my Montessori administrator credential, but I never had the honor of being a guide in a classroom.
The bottom line is we ourselves have to struggle, because some teacher will say, well, you're not certified at toddler level. You don't
Right.
understand us. Or you're not a Montessori teacher. Therefore, why should I listen to you? This doesn't work.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And we all have so much to learn from one another. And I think, to your point, the second class citizens, you never know where you are going to run into that person in the future, how they will develop, where you will be in the future. And we all rely and depend on one another, no matter what that title is. There's no one who's better than anyone else. We all have inherent human value. And that's something that we have to model and encourage and insist on in our schools, that this be the standard. I think that goes to the culture that we're building, and that is tantamount to retaining teachers. And I say teachers broadly. I mean all the folks on the campus, because we all have a role as educators, whether you're a custodian, whether you're in the cafeteria, whether you're a guide, whether you're a librarian. We're all modeling behaviors and interactions with our next generation that we are all collectively guiding young people in their development.
The other side is many schools struggle with finding great teachers. It's really, really hard to find people. And so we hire who we can hire. And a lot of times our children and our schools pay the price for that. So while we need to treat everyone with kindness and respect, and we need to be prepared to nurture the growth of everyone, we also have to understand the concept that it takes three things to make a Montessori program. It takes a prepared Montessori educator who knows what to do. Now, having said that, you're probably going to hire people who are somewheres on a journey towards being a master at that craft. And so putting them down because they're not as good as you would like isn't going to get you far. But
No.
hiring talent is really, really important. It also takes a prepared environment for learning, and it takes a prepared community of learners. So all three are important. And the point is that those people that are really good at finding people who are going to be successful in your school, whether it's a public school of 600 kids in an inner city, or whether it's a suburban school that's mostly early child, whatever your school is, you got to find the right people for you, and you got to turn them into a team. You got to find the right families and turn them into a community. That's the work of being a Montessori school leader.
You're absolutely right, Tim. I see we have a couple of comments coming in the chat. Soraya says, well said. It's truly the people who make a school special. And I agree. We all have inherent value. In addition to professional qualifications, passion also speaks in our day-to-day duties in the classroom and in our interactions. And that's from Modupe.
Hope we're pronouncing that correctly, Madupe. I would suggest that, again, when you're hiring, and that's not what today's topic really is, we ought to do one on how do you know you're marrying the right person, and how do you find them? How do you get them to apply to your school? But I think that one thing it's helpful to remember is you're looking at three, shall we say, buckets. The one is when you're thinking about hiring somebody, what skills, what knowledge do they need to be successful for this role at your school on the first day, as opposed to we can train you in-house. McDonald's will train you on the job. But if you're running an airline, you probably don't have the 10 years it takes to train someone to be a pilot. Montessori teachers take about 5 years to prepare. Doesn't mean that in their first year they don't have value, but every time you lose an experienced teacher, you got an issue of it's going to take time, money, and effort to coach them to be able to really be able to run the complication of a child-centered learning environment as opposed to a teacher-directed lecture hall. The second thing is you got to ask, what experience do these people need to be successful? It may be they're fresh out of training, but they've never worked with kids. And that doesn't mean they won't be good, but it may be, do they have what it takes to be successful? Success or experience suggests that there's an evidence base, a track record you can look at as to how do these people actually interact with children and parents and co-teachers and assistants and administrators. And the third is their people skill and their communication skills. How do they do with stress? Are they really motivated to do this work, or do they resent the fact that they chose to do this and they feel like I'm just a stupid teacher? I wish I'd gone to law school. So why are they in the profession, and why are they a Montessori teacher, and is this really the right fit for them, and are they going to succeed emotionally with your school community?
I think, Tim, one reason that it's so important to emphasize the recruiting piece is that if you've recruited the right people for your school, it's I don't want to say that it's easier to retain them, but it's definitely a different, it's a different challenge, or a different mission that you're on when when you're retaining people who are the right fit for your school. And I say that, and let me clarify. If you are trying to retain individuals who you have significant concerns about, you're pouring in hours and hours of time and money and resources into someone who is genuinely unhappy in their job, you really have to ask yourself, am I working to retain the right person for this job, right? And when we talk about retention, we want to make sure that we're focusing on those teachers that are the right fit for your school, first and foremost. Because although it may feel difficult to find the right people, and let's face it, it's hard right now to find teachers. Um, but building that culture, you will draw more of the right people to your school when you have built a reputation that values people, that recognizes high performing staff, that values the that you get the reputation out that you are a high quality school. Um, does that make sense, Tim?
Well, absolutely. I mean, again, if you know a very famous Montessorian, Harvey Hallenberg, who used to be my associate head of school, was brilliant, and people would come from all over the world to work with Harvey and me and the faculty that we built up. And if you're really good at your work, you're probably going to be sending people out into the world after a number of years to become the founders or the leaders of new Montessori schools. So you become like a training academy for the leaders of the next generation. But money follows excellence. And the bottom line is you go for the very best people you can possibly get. You've got to have a backup plan. What do you do if the best teacher in the world hits a deer and their car is totaled and they're in the hospital for the next 3 months? Who's running that classroom? What is your backup plan? Or what if they get an offer they can't refuse? I have a very famous friend, Dr. Paul Epstein, who I love dearly. I've written a bunch of books with. Paul used to be my head of upper school. Paul got an offer he could not refuse and accepted it 3 days before the school year began, uh, and left me high and dry with a high school of 135 kids, and we had to figure out what to do. You can't get anywhere just being angry with someone for doing what they got to do for their family. And by the way, Paul and I are best friends. You do get over these things and you find a way to move on, but you have to have a plan. What am I going to do if a teacher who I thought was going to be brilliant decides that she can't continue in the classroom anymore, or she just thought this school was going to be great, but she doesn't like it. So the culture of the people you're working with, as well as the head of school, are incredibly important in recruiting teachers and retaining teachers.
That's right. And I think, some of the things that were helpful to me and the research supports in retaining teachers is first and foremost making sure that the assignment fits their skill set and their expectations. I consulted with a school in the United States where there had been some last minute changes in assignments. And so some folks who had been offered certain jobs went unwillingly to different positions on the campus. And so we all know that change is inevitable. And when we're hiring teachers, we want to be sure that we're representing to the best of our abilities the accurate assignment that they will be stepping into, whether it's the position or the demands of the position, or the challenges that perhaps the school is facing, it's much better to be transparent and open about even the possibility that I'm offering you this position, but bear in mind that, especially this happens in public schools, you're under contract with the district. So while I may have offered you a certain position, if our census doesn't pan out and maybe we're under enrolled, I would advise the teacher that they might be placed in a different classroom, so that they understand, even at the moment of hiring, that there may be a change in assignment, as regrettable as that might be, helping to prepare that individual before they sign the dotted line, and operating in transparency and honesty is really, I think, essential in the hiring process. And that goes to retaining teachers. Right at the very beginning, be as open and upfront and honest with your staff as you potentially can be.
That's a really important point. And we also have to remember, some of you have taught in non-Montessori schools. I know originally I was involved in the progressive education movement, even though I went to Berry. And in running progressive schools, I found it was much more difficult not to find teachers. There were lots of great young things that wanted to go out there and do it. But it's really challenging if you're a John Dewey teacher to make up curriculum on the fly. It's exhausting. Not everyone can do that well. It's fun to do it once in a while, but to do it all day long and not have a scope and sequence and a curriculum guide and textbooks and all kinds of pre-written material is really hard. Montessori educators can be incredibly difficult. They can be problematic. They can be prima donnas. I've got a great question here from Timothy Beach saying, what about, if you hire someone from a training that's really, really different from what your ideal is, and they have a very different understanding of Montessori procedures, practices, philosophy, curriculum, scope and sequence, what do you do? And I think when you get any two Montessori educators in a room, you've got at least 20 different philosophies. It's like they used to say about a community of Jewish people. You get 10 of us in a room and you got 100 different opinions. I think one of the things we have to do as part of it is, first off, respect everyone who does get hired for who they are and where they are in their journey. Secondly, we have to understand that we're constantly engaged in a process of helping people to talk to each other, to share each other's perspectives and experience without assuming that there is no Montessori truth. I mean, there is a Montessori truth. There may be multiple truths, but I think, Lindsay, you're in Washington, D.C. for the Montessori Research collaborative.
That's right. Yes.
So what we know is there is Montessori over her career evolved, and her understanding of what was best practice evolved. We know there are multiple traditions within AMS, just within AMS, there are multiple traditions. AMI tends to be more coherent, although having been around as long as I have, I've seen AMI change from Montessori is always just half day, and every child at 3 and 4 must go home at noon, and parents shouldn't work. And we don't take a child in ever after the age of 3. Well, that's not what we do anymore. We do the best we can. So we know what best practice is. At least we have a philosophy of what we think is best practice in our school. But we can't assume that our people share that. We have to somehow lovingly get them to talk with each other and try to establish what I call a Montessori best practices at our school, a handbook of how do we do birthdays and what's our position about sugar. I mean, I remember going to the Montessori School of Anderson back in the early 2000s. They had a Coke machine serving sugared Coke. And but the kids weren't allowed to have it, but the teachers could. They could smoke too. So again, you got to figure out what's your position on these things.
Well, and putting those things in writing, I think, is essential, and having teacher voice in the process. That also goes to retention, to your point of, policy and, sugar. I know that actually was something that we struggled with a little bit at Garden Oaks, because when you have this position. So, for example, we took all the vending machines out of off the campus, and we asked teachers, please be mindful that if you're drinking a beverage in front of the children, that if you must, have something that's not on our collaborative list, that it be in a cup that's nondescript and you're not, you don't have a soda can at your desk. Um, we want to be respectful, and yet all together we are sharing that collective focus and agreement. It really, it's a covenant that we enter into, that way of operating, that makes our working environment a much more peaceful place. If I am adhering to the promise that I made to my community as a teacher, and I'm saying no sugar in my class, and yet Tim next door is handing out M&Ms, then I'm the bad guy, right? Because somebody else is having fun right down the hall, and everybody, loves the M&Ms, and doesn't understand why maybe once a month there's an exception to the policy. So that can, at times build resentments and feelings of frustration among the staff members. And as a school leader, it's my responsibility then to address these discrepancies in policy in a kind and loving way, and building understanding around why we have certain policies and procedures in place, and why it's important for everyone to follow and support one another. As opposed to me coming down the hall and saying, you know better than that. You can't have M&Ms, and admonishing the person. Let me then lead in a way of leaning in with curiosity, because clearly there's a misunderstanding here. And we need to resolve this in a way that builds trust and collaboration and respect for one another on our campus. And I think the way that we interact with our staff can be not only a model to our colleagues, but instrumental in building that relationship and that safe space where people feel valued on our campuses.
I remember in 1968 going to the AMS convention in Philadelphia, and Jack Blessington got up on stage. He was one of the, if you don't know who Jack Blessington was, I think he's still with us on this earth. Certainly one of my favorite people in Montessori for many, many years, but retired now. Jack got up and said, and he used to say this almost every year when he would get up and sort of keynote, Montessorians love children, but we don't like each other. And I think most of you who have run a school will agree that the tendency of a teacher who has more experience to upset the feelings of a younger teacher, or someone that has a more advanced degree or has completed their training, as opposed to someone who has not even started training or did, one of these correspondence courses, as they call them. It's very easy for people to hurt each other's feelings. So part of what we're doing, and this goes into, by the way, what's going to be next week's topic, which is how do we create a culture of diversity and acceptance and inclusion and embracing our differences, in an age where people are increasingly getting territorial and getting nasty about, I don't want to even hear this woke language. So
Right.
the issue of how do we help people from different points of life, different cultures, different trainings, to find common ground. And one way we do it, in my opinion and experience, is we make time to be with each other, to talk to each other, get to know each other as people.
You know, Tim, that reminds me of a a model that I saw on a campus that I visited. And every year they had a drawing where people, or it was randomly assigned, but people were assigned another person on the campus to be their buddy. And so the assignment was that once a month, you were tasked with finding a time to get together with that other person. And I thought it was such an interesting and brilliant strategy because you would see, for example, a early childhood teacher having lunch with someone perhaps completely unexpected. It might be someone in the cafeteria, or you might see a secondary person having lunch with the PE coach, or a lower elementary teacher having lunch with a secondary teacher. And it really spoke to the interconnectedness of everyone on that campus and the way that we support and touch the lives of one another in our roles on the campus. And this included the office staff as well. So you might have the receptionist having lunch with an upper elementary teacher. And over the course of that school year, they built friendships and understandings. And when I spoke with the principal, she said, well, you know, at the beginning, people were, you know, apprehensive about this. They didn't want to go have lunch with someone that they didn't know. But she said, in the end, when it was time to assign a new buddy for the year, that people just didn't want to let go of those new friendships that they developed. And so, you know, they inevitably found time to still have lunch with that buddy from the year before. But she said it really strengthened the connections and the feelings of belonging among all of the members of the school community. And I just thought that was such a beautiful retention tool, and a great way to build collaboration among all of the stakeholders on that campus.
You know, I see that Mario Young has asked a great question, which is, where do you find these people? I mean, LinkedIn doesn't work, the AMS website, the competition for trained Montessori teachers is incredible. And it's getting worse every year because, one, ever since COVID, a lot of people dropped out of teaching. Number two, there are increasingly other things you can do very easily that are easier than being a teacher, much less stressful, better pay, if not the same pay, but often better benefits, Starbucks, working in Amazon, so forth. And yeah, you can say there's pros and there's cons, like going to work in the public schools for some people is very, very desirable because of the higher pay and the benefit and the retirement package and the security and all that. And that's true. And there's trade-offs, whatever you do. Some people really want to teach in a faith-based school or a small private school or a micro school or a wildflower school. There's so many different ways to do this work. But I want to acknowledge what Mary is saying. There is a terrible, terrible shortage. And I've been writing a series of articles that you may find on LinkedIn under my account where I'm trying to address some of these challenges of where do we find these people and how are other people solving it. One of which is bring them in from overseas, which our government is trying very hard to screw up our H-1B program and our J-1 visiting teacher. But bringing them in from abroad used to be one of the core solutions. But the long and the short of it is, you're right, Mary, it is hard. What I'm hearing Lindsay talking about, I think, is so important as we're all doing our search for the next person to fill an opening. The first is, if possible, really don't serve your customers, your children, your families, spoiled meat. In other words, don't just hire someone because you need a warm body. I know it hurts. It may be you've got to go in the classroom, or it may be you're going to take an assistant and you're going to spend $15,000 to run them through training, and you're going to put up with the the multi-year process of learning. But what's equally important to how do we find the next hire and how do we do it well is creating the culture within your school where people don't want to leave and where people are drawn when they come to your campus and they visit. Everything they experience just leads them to think, wow, this would be a great place to work.
You know, Tim, for me, joining other networks of sometimes it seemed to be an unlikely alliance. I joined our Chamber of Commerce, I joined our Rotary Club. And yes, that took time. I went to chamber meetings at 7 o'clock in the morning and then went to my school. But I will tell you, it was great advertising and networking. And people learned about Montessori school. And over the years, I hired I hired a daughter of one of my Rotary Club friends who ended up teaching for us. Um, I think I told you about the gentleman who I ended up hiring, but the word got out. And when people knew someone who might be interested in teaching or had completed a degree, I had more people talking about our school and about Montessori education. And those referrals were even more powerful than any ad I ever posted on LinkedIn or even on our district website. But having those personal connections and being able to explain to people what we were doing at Garden Oaks and what Montessori meant. The word got out. And I would also add, as far as recruiting, my teachers were actively recruiting. My staff was actively recruiting. When they knew someone who might be interested in Montessori education, we had many referrals come through our existing staff members, whether that position was in the front office or as a guide or a teaching assistant. Um, our teachers were our billboards and our spokespeople when they were out in the community. And they did a great job recruiting for our school.
I think that's so true. And we also ought to mention, you're almost certainly over the next decade, those of you who are school leaders or in school administration, you're going to hire multiple people who are not trained, or their training is really not up to the standards that you would like for your school. In some way, shape, or form, they're going to need continuing growth. And you've got to figure out a way of creating what some people call a professional learning community. And some people do it by subscribing to the Montessori Library from CGMS or the professional development courses that they run. Some people bring in people like Lindsay or me or John Wolf, people like us to do in-house, one-off workshops for a day or a weekend or a half day. Some people go to Trillium and they get the very inexpensive webcast that you can get. I mean, there is no one answer, just as there's no one style of training. When I started in Montessori in the early 60s, the only way you could get trained was a year of full-time study. That was it. And it had very little experience with children, but a lot of work on curriculum and philosophy and what was considered best practice. And some of it was not very connected to reality, like we're only going to take in kids at 3 and not 3.5 and so forth. In reality, we ended, in the real world, there were kids that weren't quite potty trained adequately, and we had to clean up poop, and we didn't want to. But it was really, really expensive, and it wasn't available in most towns. Like I was in Washington, D.C., and the Washington Montessori Institute was founded just before I became involved with the Barry School. But when I discovered AMS, which had a very different model, what Nancy Rambush called the summer intensive 8-week, crash course, and then a year of supervised student teaching, that became another model. And it works for some people. And then back in 2006, Kitty Bravo and John Wolfe and my son Mark Selden and I, really in part because one of my dear friends owns a national North American Montessori Center, whatever, NAMC. And I remember asking my friend Dale uh, Gaussman, how do you sleep at night? You're an AMI educated guide. How do you basically sell people an album of printed lessons and some DVDs? And he said, well, it's meeting a need. And I kept saying, okay, and how can we make it better? And he said, well, I'm not really interested in making it better because I'm meeting the need right now. And that I just took a couple of years thinking about it, and that led us to say, well, maybe there's another way of doing it that it creates still another strong option. I remember in the early years, Betsy Coe thinking I had sold out completely because we were doing anything online, the blended learning, low residency model. The bottom line is part of what we have to do as school leaders is figure out where do we get our teachers from? How do we attract them? How do we keep them? And what sources of pre-service training or in-service training or re in-service training that continues? Like our friend Cheryl Allen is now a teaching coach at a great Montessori public school outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. Some schools are increasingly, it's not Charlottesville, Virginia, whatever that great mountain town is in North Carolina, blanking on it at the moment. The bottom line is the idea of the teaching coach is increasingly popular, and some schools can afford that. But I think the key point is, as leaders, figuring out what can you afford, what are the options available to you, how do we find people in your community? There are people on this call right now who are from a small town called Salem, Virginia. Salem Montessori School is on this call. And I know that it's really, really hard to find certified Montessori teachers for the Salem Montessori School. There's someone else on this call from Charlotte Montessori School. And it's hard in Charlotte, North Carolina to find great Montessori teachers. We have to think like an omnivore, like a bear. You eat pretty much whatever is around, whether it's berries or fish or roots. And we have to find great ways of finding great people. John Moncure, some of us know John Moncure well. John Moncure was a military officer at the National War College, and he discovered Montessori in his hometown of Camden, South Carolina, and became a great Montessori leader. I think the trick is finding people with the right heart. We can teach.
You're absolutely right, Tim. I've seen individuals from the most prestigious Montessori training programs who really struggled in the classroom, who perhaps pursued Montessori education because they'd been a Montessori child or their parent had been a Montessorian, but their heart wasn't in it. They were doing it out of obligation to someone else. And yet I found other teachers who might have even attended, one of those online programs, who was absolutely brilliant and an exemplary Montessorian in practice. So again, getting to your point of finding the right people and then setting those shared expectations and supporting people. I think number one, being very open and honest up front at hiring, and then supporting people in the onboarding process, and then that continued support throughout their career, and differentiating that support for the needs of the folks on your campus. The one size fits all of support and continuing development can be frustrating for educators. And I think another way of retaining folks is identifying their passions and their areas of strength, and potential challenge so that they feel that their needs are being met as they progress throughout their career. I think that those are really important elements of teacher retention.
Again, one of the things we're seeing in the chat is, where do we get people? And I see Timothy Beach has said, well, what about our TAs, our teaching assistants? And teaching assistants and parents, former students, substitute teachers, people you meet through the Rotary or Kiwanis, these are all great sources. And so first off, Timothy, I couldn't agree with you more. Quite often people who we already know or who we meet in our lives who are not yet Montessori teachers are often the very, very best people that we're going to get. That doesn't mean that there isn't a cost. There is a very high cost in training. For every single person you have to bring in, you're going to invest somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $25,000 or more. And if you were an AMI certified school, I'd say it'd be closer to $80,000 because you're paying normally for people to spend the equivalent of 9 months of their lives living usually in another city and needing an income, and you're paying for their credentialing and their food and their transportation. So you're making a serious investment, whether it's only 5,000 or whether it gets upwards closer to 100,000. And it's no different than a lot of industries like running an airline. If you're going to train people to become pilots, you're going to be investing in their education or certification. Something else that Timothy threw at us was, well, do we have to certify, or are there options? I mean, are there options? Like, do we have to only hire MACD certified teachers? The answer is, it depends on your understanding of what Montessori is. It depends on how aggressively you want to run a fully implemented Montessori school and what compromises you can sleep with at night. On the other hand, all of us end up hiring people who don't have the training we wish they would have, and we have to do the best we can with who we've got. And we do have to remember, this is not, there are levels of knowledge in Montessori. David Kahn used to say there are people who have a very, very light level of understanding of Montessori, and their practice is pretty much made up. And it may not have much to do with Montessori. They can be pretty rude, crude, and obnoxious to children, for example, or they can be kind of little and loud and chaotic and disorderly, right, whatever. The long and short of it is, we're all on a journey. Montessori, I cannot tell you how much I believe in MACD. I think I no longer trust any of the brands, whether it's AMS, AMI, IMC, MEPI. They're just brands. They're organizations of people who find common ground, and it's fine. But to me, I'm a citizen of no one country. I'm a Montessori educator. I know people from every organization have very different understandings of Montessori. And it's no different than being Jewish or Islamic or Buddhist or Christian. There's a lot of different ways to be a Montessorian, but we do need to find common ground within our school. Doesn't mean we have to hate people that are different from us.
That's right. I couldn't agree more, Tim. Now, without sounding like a Sarasota University commercial, I do want to point out that Sarasota does have a bachelor's completion program. And it was designed specifically with the idea that we have so many talented teaching assistants who may be interested in pursuing a Montessori credential, but may not have the bachelor's degree to support their choice of credential, right? So if they're wanting to complete a lower elementary or upper elementary, or perhaps they want to take the infant toddler training and have many years of experience and would like that bachelor's degree, we have a path that individuals can apply to Sarasota University and use their professional experience. And if they have previous credentials, certifications, they can put all of that together in a professional portfolio for us to consider as meeting the first 60 hours toward their bachelor's degree. So a bachelor's degree with us is 120 total credits, but with that professional portfolio, they're starting halfway through. On top of that, if they're working on their Montessori credential, they can then earn up to 30 credit hours at the bachelor's level toward their degree, in addition to completing their Montessori credential. So when it's all said and done through our dual enrollment option, they will only have 10 courses remaining or 30 credit hours to finish that bachelor's degree. And our programs are 100% online, and our courses are offered in 8-week sessions. And our adult learners can work on those assignments at their own pace. So we have endeavored in our design of the program, of course, to be Montessori infused, aligned to Montessori philosophy, differentiated to the needs of our students. And then very accessible because we are 100% online. And I think especially with that dual enrollment option, this is a great way to recruit and possibly even retain some of your staff who might be interested in completing a degree and look at potentially scholarshiping at least a portion of their degree in order to stay with you. And to that, Tim, it also reminded me when we talk about the investment in our staff members, that can be part of your employment agreement as well. So at Garden Oaks, if we were to pay for an individual's Montessori credential, they did need to sign a commitment to us to stay for at least the next 3 years. Of course, we would hope that they'd stay even longer, but we did ask that they would make a commitment to us for at least a 3-year span, or they would agree to repay a portion of their training back to us. So we felt that it was worth our investment if we could be guaranteed at least 3 years with this individual, or if something were to happen and they had to leave, we asked that that portion be repaid so that we could then start training with someone else. And that did work for us as a recruitment tool. We did have many people and even certified teachers who had been interested in becoming Montessorians for years, but they didn't have the finances to enroll in the training themselves. So that also became a recruitment tool by advertising that we would pay at least a portion of the training.
I know we're going to run out of time. By the way, I just want to reiterate that the university Lindsay's talking about is Sarasota University. Lindsay, maybe you could put your email address into
Absolutely.
But I really, I'd love to know if those of you who are online or those of you who listen to this as a recording, put in the notes or the comments, the chat, whether or not you'd like to hear more, because we have only scratched the surface of the strategies of how do you find the right people, how do you recruit them, and how do you retain them. But a few quick thoughts. The first is, in most industries, there are people who are salespeople, and the really good ones are called the rainmakers. In a law firm, this is the people who go out and find the really, really high value clients. And if you are good at that, you are paid for the value you bring to the firm. Lindsay, you described how, as a member of the leadership of a public Montessori school, you would go out early in the morning before the school day started, and you'd attend the Rotary Club and the chamber, and how that investment paid off long term. I could not agree with you more. And it's really hard when you're leading a school and you're raising kids and you've got a spouse and you're doing all the stuff. knowing that in addition to everything else, if you really want to solve your problem, you need to make an investment in your school. And the kind of thing Lindsay was describing is that kind of investment in being a rainmaker. My friend Pete Judds, who's retired now as the founder and director of the Tokyo or Montessori School of Tokyo, used to spend 2 months a year traveling the world, meeting really high value candidates that he met through his online networking and spending time getting to know them before he would hire them to come to Tokyo for 3 or 4 years. Building with the best is really one of our great challenges as a leader. The other great challenge is turning them into a happy, harmonious, healthy community. And so often we have schools where the head of school is just banging their head against the wall. I can't get my teachers to want to be at the events or to smile at parents or to be on the same page with the other teachers. They just, they're doing their own thing and they got their own understanding of Montessori. And, you can't make people change, but what you can do is create conditions where people increasingly get a sense of what the program is, who we are, what we're all about. Your corporate culture becomes the party way. And I want to close with a couple of teasers. And I want to know whether you, as audience, would like more, because I'm sure Lindsay and I could easily do another 1, 2, 3, probably 20 sessions building on what we've started today. By the way, if you ever take a course like Lindsay took, one of the courses like the one we offer at the Center for Guided Montessori Studies or at Sarasota University, where you get a master's degree in Montessori school leadership, they normally go into the building blocks. How do you recruit the right people? How do you find them? How do you know they're right? How do you support them? How do you build up systems to increase the odds that you're going to be the school that recruits people when everyone else around you is saying there ain't no good teachers out there? This is a science. There are secrets to this. You don't have to beat your head against the wall. But let me give you just one example. If you and I were in Japan, we would have weeks before the first child arrives to organize ourselves as a faculty for the new school year and to get to know the students that are coming. If we were in Finland or most of the Scandinavian countries, pretty much the same thing would be true. We'd also have time during the school day to meet with our colleagues, to plan, to prepare, to share notes about the kids we're working with, to meet with parents. We struggle to find the money for our teachers to meet more than once a month. In fact, how many of you have a full faculty meeting even once a month? I know schools that only do it 2 or 3 times a year. That's like managing a long distance marriage where you only see each other for a day a month. Doesn't work well. So the more time you can figure out to facilitate people feeling that they're seen, feeling that they're heard, feeling like they know who you are, feeling that they know that you know who they are, that you're coming in their classrooms and seeing them, not to evaluate them, because no one wants to be evaluated, even though we have to. People don't want to feel like they're walking on eggshells. They want to feel like we love them, we value them, we appreciate them. On the other hand, not everything that people do who get paid by us is really great stuff. And so we're looking to pay people for excellence. All of that is a fine dance, right, Lindsay?
That's absolutely true, Tim.
Well, there's so much to share. And again, we'd love to, before you sign off, we'd love to hear any last thoughts you have. Is there anyone that wants to unmute? Because we'd love to hear from you. Lindsay, I know you got to get to the research network. When does your session start?
Well, it started earlier, but I flew in today. So as soon as we conclude, I'll be headed over there.
Mandupi, I see that you say, kindly advise my question in the chat. And I think you may be talking about being a grandmother and a Montessorian who is not actively involved in your candidate, and you want to volunteer, I think, in a kindergarten class. Not quite sure if I understood what you were trying to say. The long and short of it is the bottom line is it's one, I think you're such a good person to want to continue to be involved even though you're retired. And there is no one way to do it. I mean, whether it's reading with kids or bringing your dog in to have the kids read to your dog or volunteering as a substitute, there's so many ways to be involved in a Montessori community. I see my
That's so,
friend Yenny is here. Hi, Yenny, how are you?
Tim, I wanted to just add to Modupe's question. I think she talked about perhaps a physical challenge there. There are also mentoring programs with young people now online, which gives you lots of flexibility and options for setting your own schedule.
And I see Asma, excuse me, Asma, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, asks, how do you figure out whether to invest in a teacher for more training or to let them go? And I think ultimately it's going to be your heart is going to tell you the answer. If they have the right personality and values, and if they're willing to put in the work, I mean, not everyone has the will to do Montessori teacher training. I mean, how many Montessori training centers have people that are, been out there for 6 years and they still haven't completed their work? So not everyone has the self-discipline to be a graduate student, which is what Montessori training really is like. But the long and short of it is you have to figure out, do they have the right heart? Because as a director of Montessori training, I can tell you, I can teach someone how to be a Montessori teacher. I cannot teach them how to love children in a way that will allow them to be effective with children if they're not connecting on an emotional level with them and their parents. See, we're getting more questions are coming in. See my friend Jessica from down in Charlotte, finding a recipe for new entree. There's so much good stuff here. Long and short about it, I hope you're all finding the webinar series for Montessori. Really, this is for independent school leaders. Lindsay and I are both Montessori educators, but we don't care if you're from a Catholic school, a conventional non-Montessori public school, a charter school, Waldorf school. We're all dealing with kids and parents, right?
That's right.
And that this particular session on Thursdays is how to lead a school. And there's so much to talk about.
And I'm seeing some great ideas for perhaps future sessions too, Tim.
I appreciate that so much. We will be sending you all, again, a handout. We didn't have slides this week, thank God. I'd much rather talk with people. We really encourage you next week to come back and unmute and talk with us. We'll be sending you, some sort of resource that may be of still more help. And we will see you next week when we're talking about how to understand and think about the idea of inclusion and diversity and acceptance. Probably embracing differences is the phrase I like. Lindsay, you are part of an organization of Montessori educators, right?
Yes, that's right. Montessori for Social Justice. In fact, we just had our unconference this past weekend in conjunction with the Indigenous Peoples Weekend in the Twin Cities in Minnesota.
So I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. I don't care if you're a liberal or a conservative. Um, the whole issue in Montessori, in my mind, is first and foremost common ground, looking for common ground, finding a way of building peace with people who have a different worldview than you, a different experience than you, and seeing them as a real person with real ideas and finding a way to talk with each other, not as the enemy. And I don't care if you're liberal or whether you're conservative. You can like Charlie Kirk or not like Charlie Kirk. I got slammed for saying something about Charlie Kirk a couple of weeks ago when he was shot, about what a tragedy this was. And It had nothing to do with Charlie Kirk. I happen to be a guy who's neither a liberal or a conservative. I try to stay out of that kind of stuff. The long and short of it is we as Montessorians are all about seeing children for who they really are, whether they're handicapped, whether a person of a different race or religion, person of poverty, a person of great wealth. We want to see them for the human beings they really are. And in an age where people are getting polarized and criticizing each other from both the left and the right, how do we really talk to each other in this world?
Well, I look forward to that discussion next week, Tim.
There you go. I look forward to seeing you all. Remember, Lindsay is from, among other things, Montessorians for Social Justice, Sarasota University, a consultant in her own right. I'm from the Montessori Foundation, which is the sponsor of these webcasts, along with my collaborator, Clint Lausch from Ames, which is my favorite school marketing company in the world. By the way, I know a lot of great ones out there like Nito Marketing and School Success and so forth, but of all of them that I've known, I am a big fan of my friend Clint Lausch and his work and contribution to the world. If you ever need consultants or professional development or a mentor, that's what we at the Montessori Foundation do for schools. And if we're not the right fit, we try to hook you up with someone like Lindsay. For example, one school I was working with, Lindsay was the better fit, and she did a great job for that school out in Tucson, Arizona, right?
That's right.
The bottom line is there's so much work to be done in the world. We're all in it together. It is not a competition.
All in it together. I couldn't agree with you more, Tim.
Goodbye, everyone. Please.
Bye for now, everybody.
Bye
Look
for
forward
now.
to you next week.
Take care, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, my friend.
Thank you.
Bye, Clint.
See you, everybody.
Feel like that TV show where they kept saying goodbye, goodbye, everyone in the peanut gallery, and the cow would moo at the end. This is Tim Selden from the Montessori Foundation signing off.